Hello. Story 1. For several years, I owned a house that I rented out through StaySphere. Ultimately, I decided to stop doing this because of the considerable stress involved in keeping up with the property management responsibilities while also maintaining my primary job. One of the main benefits of using StaySphere compared to traditional long-term renting was the potential to earn significantly more income if the house received frequent bookings. Since the property was located in a relatively high-traffic area frequented by vacationers, StaySphere proved to be an excellent choice for us. My wife and I were initially enthusiastic about the venture, but it became increasingly demanding as more people began booking the house. We had to ensure that everything stayed on schedule, which included hiring cleaning services to prepare the house after one guest departed and before the next arrived. Furthermore, we needed to be diligent about responding to guest messages and emails promptly. Things were progressing smoothly for approximately 2 years before an incident occurred involving guests we believed to be a young couple staying at the house. Just like in every previous instance, I sent them the electronic unlock code for the door upon their arrival. I should mention that I rarely, if ever, actually saw the customers in person. After they confirmed they were inside the house and everything was satisfactory, I was able to relax for the remainder of my day off. It's worth noting again that my interactions with customers were almost always limited to just a couple of text messages. Typically, they would text upon arriving and upon leaving, perhaps with an occasional question about the property, but that was usually the extent of our communication. However, as 9 o'clock approached and I was preparing to go to bed, I received a text message from the young man who was supposedly staying at the house. The message was brief, stating he would call me in a minute, and a minute later, he did call. I had a sense of unease the moment I saw his text, but what he told me was still surprising. He stated that the water supply in the house was not functioning. Naturally, I apologized, even though I found it difficult to comprehend how that could possibly be the case. However, living in a house without water is unacceptable, so I understood that I needed to arrange for it to be fixed immediately. I asked if I could come over quickly to inspect the situation, so that I could have someone come the following morning to carry out the repairs. He politely agreed to my request. I drove over to the property a few minutes later. As I pulled into the driveway, I observed 2 cars parked there. At the time, this wasn't necessarily a significant warning sign, but it struck me as rather odd. This was because they were supposedly a young couple on vacation for just a single night, and I couldn't understand why they would require 2 separate vehicles. I speculated that someone might be visiting them, which technically wasn't permitted under the rental terms, but I didn't particularly mind. I walked up to the front door, knocked, then entered the code and stepped inside. The house was remarkably quiet. I had expected the guests to be waiting for me, but I couldn't see them anywhere. In retrospect, I probably should have searched for them first, but I was tired and simply wanted to resolve the issue promptly. My immediate priority was to inspect the main water valve to ensure there wasn't a leak or a flood. So I proceeded down to the basement and located the valve. Everything in the basement appeared normal. There was no visible water accumulation or any signs of damage. I was confused, but then I began to manipulate the valve and instantly heard water starting to flow again. As I turned it further, I realized it had been completely shut off manually. I remained in the basement for another minute, attempting to understand the reason behind this action, before a profoundly uncomfortable feeling began to settle over me. This feeling was particularly intensified by the fact that I hadn't seen anyone when I entered the house. I found it impossible to see how anyone other than the guests could have turned off the water, which led me to believe they had done so intentionally to lure me to the property. Alternatively, they might have been trying to engineer a situation to demand a discount on their Staysphere stay due to the perceived inconvenience. I made the decision to leave the house, return to my car, and then try calling them back as a safety measure. I got up and started walking towards the stairs when I heard the basement door open, followed by the distinct sounds of multiple sets of footsteps descending. When they reached the bottom, 3 men were standing there. "Is it fixed?" one of them inquired. His voice sounded similar to the man I had spoken to on the phone. Although all 3 of these men appeared significantly older than the young man I had thought was staying at the house, I informed him that the water should now be working and speculated that the valve must have simply tightened on its own. I was consciously trying to avoid placing any blame, as the entire situation was making me very uncomfortable, and I just wanted to get out of that basement and away from these individuals. They all just stood there observing me, not saying anything further. "Well, let me know if you need anything else," I said, attempting to walk between them to get to the stairs. They continued to stand there, watching me as I moved around them. However, as I passed the 3rd man, the one closest to the stairs, I caught sight of a gun tucked into the back of his pants. Seeing this caused me to panic slightly, and I rushed up the stairs a bit quicker. Fortunately, they did not pursue me. They remained in the basement as I quickly exited the house and drove away. Upon arriving home, I woke up my wife and recounted what had occurred. She was concerned and convinced me to contact the police to check on the situation at the house. Given that the people present were not the guests we expected, and the circumstances were highly unusual, calling the police felt completely warranted. We estimated we had waited around 20 minutes before receiving a call from a police officer. He stated that nobody appeared to be home at the Staysphere property and that he might require me to provide access. I instead gave him the unlock code. Approximately another 20 minutes later, he called back, reporting that there were no indications of anyone still being present, The following day, we discovered that the credit card the man had used for payment was stolen. After inspecting the house, we also found that they had taken some expensive decorative items and appliances. I suppose there was never actually a young couple staying there at all. The one aspect of the situation that remained unexplained was their entire scheme involving the non-functional water. I believe they either intended for me not to charge them for their stay, hoping they could continue using the stolen card for a longer period, or they were planning to rob me at gunpoint. However, this then leads me to question why they didn't proceed with a robbery. Here were 3 dangerous, unidentified men blocking my exit in the basement after seemingly leading me into a deliberate trap, and yet they simply allowed me to leave. It doesn't make sense to me. Following this incident, I never again visited the house while customers were present. A few months later, we decided to stop using Staysphere altogether and instead put the house up for traditional rental. Story 2. Last year, I took a solo trip to Salt Lake City. I hadn't had many opportunities to go on vacations before, and when I did, it was always with my family. This was the first time I was finally going to have the chance to enjoy my time somewhere else completely by myself. I understand that might sound a little unusual, but being alone is perfectly fine with me, especially since I rarely got the chance to experience solitude. Anyway, I searched for accommodations in the area, looking at both hotels and options on Staysphere. Surprisingly, the Staysphere listings were generally much nicer and less expensive. However, all the cheaper options were located a bit further away from the city center. Since I was driving my own car, I wasn't overly concerned about having to travel a short distance to reach the city. Consequently, I decided to book a nicely sized place through Staysphere. It was a small unit, but the kitchen and bedroom areas were pleasant, Last year, I took a solo trip to Salt Lake City. I hadn't had many opportunities to go on vacations before, and when I did, it was always with my family. This was the first time I was finally going to have the chance to enjoy my time somewhere else completely by myself. I understand that might sound a little unusual, but being alone is perfectly fine with me, especially since I rarely got the chance to experience solitude. Anyway, I searched for accommodations in the area, looking at both hotels and options on Staysphere. Once I had brought everything inside and gotten settled, I relaxed on the couch and turned on the television. I had just completed a 10-hour drive, so I was really looking forward to spending the evening unwinding and savoring the silence. I fell asleep quite quickly, but it was only around 7 o'clock, so my body naturally woke me up a few hours later. The time was just after 10 p.m., and the television was still on. I retrieved the remote control and switched it off, then got up to get a glass of water before heading to the bedroom. As I walked from the living room towards the kitchen area, I felt a distinct, strong, cold breeze brush against me. With my tired eyes, I glanced to my right and saw that the front door was completely open. My eyes immediately snapped wide open, and my heart began to pound. I stared at the open door for a moment, before quickly scanning the rest of the room. I was certain that I had closed and locked the door when I arrived, so this realization was genuinely terrifying me. I walked over to the door and gently pulled it shut, listening intently for any sounds that might indicate someone else was inside the house. For context, I'm not a particularly large individual, but I am fairly tall and in good physical condition. Therefore, I felt confident that I could physically confront and deter an intruder, unless they were armed with a gun. I grabbed a kitchen knife, still moving quietly, and systematically walked through the house, checking every room thoroughly. Nobody was there. This discovery only served to increase my confusion. I sent a text message to the homeowner, asking if someone was supposed to be visiting the property that night, or if something had happened, explaining the situation with the open door. However, it was late, so I didn't really anticipate receiving a response right away. I went around the house, ensuring every door was locked, and then quickly conducted another check of the property. Although I was more awake than before, I was still very tired. I went to bed and managed to fall asleep without any difficulty. When I woke up the next morning, however, I was significantly less calm than I had been the previous night. I heard something coming from outside. It wasn't coming from outside the house itself, but rather from outside my bedroom door. I didn't know how to react and essentially froze in place, waiting for whoever was outside the room to make the first move. As I sat there in bed, my mind raced, trying to figure out how this person could have possibly gained entry. The only individual who would have the entry password for the door was the homeowner. In that moment, I became absolutely certain it was him. This thought, strangely, gave me more courage, leading me to believe it must be some kind of creepy individual who enjoys spying on the guests staying at his Stay-Sphere property. I got out of bed, still not having heard anything else, and grabbed my phone from the nightstand with the intention of calling the police. However, I must have made too much noise because almost immediately, I heard someone start running away from the door and towards the front of the house. That realization only terrified me further, knowing that the intruder had been standing right next to my bedroom door the entire time. I dialed 911, but during the time it took for the police officers to arrive, nothing else happened. The person had left. I subsequently found a hotel to stay at for the remainder of my vacation. What is remarkable is that the owner of the Stay-Sphere provided me with a full refund, as he was able to furnish proof that he was not at the property and therefore wasn't the intruder. He was apparently very concerned about the incident and turned out to be a genuinely nice, elderly gentleman. It was already unsettling enough when I suspected the owner, but knowing it was just some random stranger makes it even more disturbing. I still have no idea how he managed to get inside the house or why he was observing me, but the experience continues to give me chills whenever I think about it. The part that I find myself dwelling on the most is waking up and discovering the front door wide open. Now that I am certain someone was actually inside the house, it means that whoever it was entered the property, saw me asleep on the couch, and then proceeded to do whatever it was they had come there to accomplish. It's just incredibly unnerving and creepy to consider, and it has made me never want to stay at a Stay-Sphere property alone again. Story 3. Last year, while on vacation, I was staying at a small 2-bedroom property booked through Stay-Sphere. This particular location was intended as a rest stop for the night on my way to another Stay-Sphere property where I would spend the primary portion of my vacation. Upon my arrival, the place was clean and empty, exactly as I had expected. I walked around the entire house to inspect it before bringing in my luggage. I then settled onto the couch. By this point, it was probably around 8 p.m. As I was sitting there, starting to doze off slightly, I was jolted awake by the sound of the doorbell ringing. Confused and immediately alarmed, I looked over at the front door. Being a relatively small young girl, I can confidently say that I am easily scared and generally dislike interacting with strangers, especially when I am alone at night. I got up and walked towards the door, and as I approached, I could hear 2 men whispering to each other on the other side. The door did not have a safety lock or any similar feature, so I simply kept the door securely shut and called out to them. "Hello?" I said. "Hey, we're here for the Stay-Sphere. Can you open the door?" A man's voice called back. I loudly asked what they meant, as I didn't understand what being here for the Stay-Sphere was supposed to signify. He responded by stating that he had the place booked for the night. I immediately knew there must be some kind of mistake. I told him, still yelling through the closed door, that I had booked the property as well, and that he needed to contact the owner to sort it out. The man did not sound pleased with that response, although I acknowledged that if I were in his position, I would likely be quite upset too. I heard one pair of footsteps move away from the door, while the other man asked again if I could open the door so they could discuss the situation. I was on the verge of giving in. I even placed my hand on the doorknob, thinking that he seemed believable. However, a strong intuition came over me, urging me to simply play it safe. Instead of opening the door, I said that my husband would be down shortly to help figure things out in a few minutes. I desperately did not want them to believe I was alone, hoping that mentioning a husband would catch them off guard if they had ill intentions. The man at the door did not respond. I waited for another minute, listening intently, because I did not hear any footsteps indicating they were leaving. Then, I cautiously moved the short curtain to the side and looked out the small window next to the door. The man I had seemingly been talking to was facing towards his car, which was parked in the driveway. But positioned past him was one of the most terrifying sights I have ever witnessed. A group of perhaps 5 individuals was standing further down the driveway, partially concealed, as if they were waiting for a signal. They all had some form of face coverings, and although I couldn't see the other side of the door, I strongly suspected there were even more people positioned over there. Knowing that this scenario, especially given the city I was staying in, was very likely a gang, I was overcome with absolute horror. I instinctively backed away from the door, completely panicked, and desperately tried to prevent myself from hyperventilating. I then rushed to the bedroom to retrieve my phone so I could call the police. As I did so, I could hear more footsteps all around the house. It felt as though I was surrounded by a pack of wolves who could, at any given moment, shatter the windows and break inside. I took my phone with me into the bathroom and called 911, making a conscious effort to remain calm despite my terror. The emergency operator also instructed me to remain quiet and stay calm, assuring me that they were dispatching a group of officers to my location who would arrive in just a few minutes. I stayed on the phone line, continuing to hear footsteps moving around outside the property until I heard the horrible sound of wood bending and then snapping, originating from the front door. By this point, I was crying profusely, attempting to muffle the sounds with my hand. I listened as a whole group of people rushed inside the house, immediately beginning to open doors and cabinets as they searched. Eventually, one of them approached the bathroom door and tried the handle. "Here," he yelled. He then walked away. The group continued to loot the house before the sound of police sirens was heard in the distance. Upon hearing the sirens, they began to scatter out of the property. They had all vacated the premises by the time the police officers entered. I discovered that all of my luggage was gone, and my car's window had been shattered and its contents looted as well. One of the officers remained with me to discuss some details about the incident. He informed me that the police in the area had been experiencing recent problems with large groups or gangs breaking into homes. He stated that they don't believe the primary objective of these groups is to cause physical harm to the residents, but rather to simply rob them of everything they can find. This was likely the reason they left me alone in the bathroom, recognizing that I was not a threat to them. However, regardless of whether their intentions included harming me or not, the experience was still utterly terrifying. I know it likely had little to do specifically with me staying at the Staysphere that particular night, but it has nonetheless made me feel really anxious every single time I stay at a Staysphere property now. Bye!